The Alpha King banned the Omega from the ceremony. His cub howled until she returned. Prologue. There are sounds a wolf makes only once. The first howl, the raw, untrained thing that tears from a cub's throat in the first shift, before they understand what they are or what the sound means. It happens once and it is never repeated, because by the second howl the wolf has learned to shape it, to control it, to make it the thing the pack expects rather than the thing it actually is. Konstantin Zelenko had heard his daughter's first howl. It had lasted 11 seconds. It had carried from the nursery to the east wing, and through the stone corridors of the Vaskov stronghold, like something alive. And every wolf in the building had stopped what they were doing because a first howl demanded that. Demanded witness, demanded stillness, demanded that the world hold itself quiet while something new announced that it existed. Lumi had been 3 months old. She had shifted in her crib, in the middle of the night, without anyone present, because cubs sometimes did that, the wolf arriving before anyone was ready for it. He had come running and found a silver-white cub tangled in her blankets, small enough to fit in both his hands, howling with the full, unfiltered force of something that did not yet know it was supposed to be quieter. He had picked her up and held her, and the howl had resolved into something softer, a sound between a whimper and a question, and she had pressed her nose against his neck and gone to sleep. That was 4 years ago. He had not heard the sound since. Until the morning he told Giovanna Race she could not attend the binding ceremony, and his daughter opened her mouth and made the sound that wolves only make once, except that this time it did not stop. Chapter 1, the trouble, like most trouble in the Vaskov stronghold, had started with the council, specifically with Lord Petrov, who had served 3 generations of the Zelenko line and whose commitment to tradition had the particular quality of something that had calcified into architecture. No longer a belief he held, but a structure he lived inside, one that could not be removed without bringing something down with it. The binding ceremony requires formal attendance, Petrov had said, at the council session 6 weeks before the event. The guest list is determined by rank, lineage, and standing within the territorial structure. These are not suggestions, they are the framework. I'm aware of the framework, Konstantin had said. The framework does not include household staff, Petrov had said. It does not include Omegas without pack designation. It does not include... He had paused, with the specific pause of a man choosing between the diplomatic word and the accurate word. Individuals whose relationship to the royal household is informal. Informal. The word had sat in the room with a weight that was disproportionate to its size. Giovanna Race had been in the Vaskov stronghold for 14 months. She had arrived through the seasonal intake. An Omega from the Reshka district who had applied for a position in the household's childcare rotation and had been placed by Madame Ivankov's judgment in the nursery wing. The placement had been routine. What had followed had not been. Lumi had attached to her within the first week. This was not unusual in itself. Lumi was 4, and 4-year-olds formed attachments with the intensity and selectivity of people who had not yet learned to distribute their affections strategically. What was unusual was the quality of the attachment, the way Lumi, who had been through 3 nursery attendants in 2 years without forming a lasting bond with any of them, had simply and completely decided that Giovanna was hers and had organized her entire 4-year-old existence around that decision. Konstantin had watched it happen the way he watched most things in his daughter's life. Carefully, from a position close enough to intervene, and far enough to let the thing develop on its own terms. He had watched Lumi follow Giovanna through the nursery wing, with the devotion of a small satellite in orbit. He had watched Giovanna handle the attachment with the steady, unperformative care of someone who understood that a child's trust was not a thing to be managed, but a thing to be honored. He had watched, over 14 months, as his daughter became the version of herself that he had been hoping she would find. Settled, confident, less likely to wake in the night looking for something she could not name. He had also, over 14 months, noticed Giovanna. This was the part he had not discussed with the council, because it was the part the council had no jurisdiction over, and also because it was the part he had not fully discussed with himself. He had noticed her the way you noticed something that changed the temperature of every room it was in. Not dramatically, not loudly, just the particular presence of a person who was fully and consistently themselves, who did not adjust their frequency for proximity to power, who treated him with the same quality of attention she gave to his daughter and the head cook and the gate guard, which was to say, completely without hierarchy. He had not acted on the noticing. He was a king. He had learned, through his father's example and his own experience, that acting on things was a luxury that required timing and context, and the absence of complications that the current situation did not provide. The council's position on the binding ceremony guest list was one such complication. The binding ceremony was held every 5 years, a formal reaffirmation of the pack's bonds, an event of territorial significance that drew every allied pack and every noble family. The guest list was, as Petrov had described it, framework. Rank, lineage, standing. The framework had been in place for 100 years, and it did not include Omega household staff. Constantine had reviewed the framework. He had considered pressing the point. He was the Alpha King, and the framework was subject to his authority. But pressing the point would have required explaining why, and the why was a complicated thing involving a 4-year-old's attachment, and his own unexamined noticing, and the specific political reality of a ceremony that was 6 weeks away and already organized to the last candlestick. He had made a decision. He would speak with Giovanna privately, explain the situation, and arrange for Lumi to be prepared for her absence on the day of the ceremony. It was a reasonable decision. A measured decision. It was the wrong decision. Chapter 2. He told Giovanna on a morning in the nursery wing, after Lumi had been taken to the garden by Claudine, the secondary nursery attendant, for what was described to the child as a special expedition to count the last autumn butterflies. Giovanna listened the way she listened to everything, with her full attention, her hands still, her dark eyes taking in not just the words but the thing behind the words, the architecture of the decision and its supports and its weak points. She was 27. She had a face that held things without showing them, the particular composure of someone who had learned early that what you showed the world was a choice, and who made that choice deliberately. The ceremony is a formal event, he said. The guest list follows the traditional framework, rank and lineage. I cannot... He paused. The council has made the position clear. I understand, she said. I will ensure Lumi is prepared. Claudine can. Your Majesty... She said it without sharpness, without the edge of someone who had been offended, simply his title, placed into the sentence the way a period was placed at the end of it. I understand. Claudine is capable, Lumi will manage. At the composure that was not performance but practice, the specific quality of a woman who had been told variations of you are not included enough times that the receiving of it had become a skill. I am sorry, he said. You are the king, she said. The framework is the framework. He stood in the room that smelled of his daughter and the particular warmth of the person who had been caring for her, and he thought about what Giovanna's face had done in the second, between I understand and the composure reasserting itself. It had done nothing visible. That was what bothered him. Chapter 3. Lumi was told 3 days before the ceremony. This was Claudine's recommendation, close enough to the event that the child could not build an extended anxiety about it, far enough to allow adjustment. Claudine had experience with these transitions. Claudine had managed 3 noble children before Lumi, and had a professional framework for managing a 4-year-old's expectations around temporary separations. Claudine's professional framework had not accounted for Lumi. The conversation, delivered by Claudine, with Constantine present, in the nursery's sitting room with the afternoon light coming through the windows, lasted approximately 4 minutes before Lumi stopped listening and started looking. Looking for Giovanna. Not frantically, the 4-year-old equivalent of a systems check, the child's gaze moving through the room with the focused assessment of someone verifying whether the person they needed was where they expected her to be. Giovanna was not in the room. She had been moved to the east wing for the afternoon, which was the plan Claudine had designed and which Constantine had approved. Lumi's gaze completed its circuit. She looked at Claudine. She looked at her father. Where is Giovanna? She said. Giovanna has work in the east wing today, Claudine said, with the warm competence of someone who had managed this exact conversation many times. She'll be back tomorrow. For the ceremony, you and I will. I want Giovanna, Lumi said. I know, sweetheart, and she'll be here after the ceremony. But for the day itself, I want Giovanna at the ceremony. Claudine looked at Constantine. He looked at his daughter. Giovanna can't attend the ceremony, he said. He said it directly, because Lumi was 4, but she was also his daughter, and she had inherited his preference for directness over management. The ceremony has rules about who can be there. Giovanna doesn't have the right standing. Lumi looked at him. She had his eyes, dark, direct, the same quality of assessment that he applied to council reports and territorial disputes. She applied it now to him, and he felt the specific discomfort of a man being evaluated by someone who had no investment in his authority and was simply measuring whether what he had said made sense. "That's wrong," she said. "It's the rule," he said. "It's a wrong rule." He did not have a response for that which was both honest and strategically useful, so he said nothing. Lumi accepted nothing as the answer it was. She got down from the chair, walked to the corner of the nursery where her things were kept, picked up her wooden wolf, a carved figure named Petra that had been her constant companion since the age of 2, and sat on the floor with her back to both of them. Claudine looked at Constantine with the expression of someone whose professional framework was encountering load conditions it had not been tested for. "She'll adjust," Claudine said. "Children." "I know," he said. He left the nursery and went to his study and sat at his desk and thought about the expression on his daughter's face when she had said "that's wrong," and the fact that she had been correct, and the further fact that being correct was not, in his experience, the same thing as being able to change the situation. Chapter 4. The morning of the ceremony. Lumi did not speak. This was unprecedented. Lumi had been a verbal child since her first words at 11 months, and her relationship with language had the character of someone who had discovered a powerful tool and intended to use it comprehensively. She spoke at meals and in the garden and during baths, and in the specific window between being put to bed and actually sleeping, which she had converted into a nightly soliloquy on whatever subject occupied her current attention. She did not speak at breakfast. She did not speak when Claudine dressed her in the formal clothes that had been prepared for the ceremony. She did not speak when Constantine came to the nursery to walk with her to the great hall. She looked at him with his own eyes and held Petra against her chest and said nothing. "Lumi," he said, "nothing. The ceremony is important," he said. "The pack is here. Our allies are here. I need you to—" She looked at him. Not with defiance, with something worse. With the patient clarity of a child who had made a decision and was waiting for the adults to understand it. He picked her up. She allowed this. She held Petra and leaned against his shoulder and did not speak, and they walked to the great hall, and he told himself that this was a phase, that children did this, that Claudine had assured him it was within the range of normal 4-year-old responses to temporary separation. The great hall was already full when they arrived. 300 wolves from across the territory, the allied packs, the noble families, the council in their formal positions. Lord Petrov stood near the ceremonial platform with the expression of a man whose framework had been implemented correctly and who found this satisfying. Constantine took his position. Lumi was placed in the seat beside him, the small ceremonial chair that had been used by Zelenko children for 100 years. She sat in it with Petra in her lap and looked at the hall with an expression that gave nothing away. The ceremony began. The formal invocations, the territorial reaffirmations, the rhythmic structure of a tradition that had been performed in this hall for 100 years. Constantine spoke the words. The pack responded. The allied alphas offered their bonds. The structure held. 20 minutes in, the first reaffirmation was complete. The ceremony master called for the pack's response, the collective vocalization, the harmonic that was the audible expression of a pack's unity. 300 wolves joined the sound, a resonance that filled the hall from floor to ceiling and vibrated in the stone. Lumi opened her mouth. What came out was not the pack's response. It was the sound she had made at 3 months old. The first howl, raw, unfiltered, carrying the specific frequency that every wolf in the room recognized at a biological level, because first howls were imprinted on the species like a fingerprint. Except first howls happened once and lasted seconds, and this one did not stop. It climbed, it cut through the pack's collective harmony like a blade through fabric, not louder but different, operating on a frequency that made the other sounds reorganize around it. The pack's response faltered. Voices dropped away. The ceremony master stopped speaking. Lumi howled, not the controlled sound of a child who had learned to use her voice, the uncontrolled sound of something fundamental, a wolf cub calling for someone who was not there, with the full force of a bond that had not been given a choice in the matter. Constantine reached for her. She did not stop. He picked her up and she howled against his chest, and the entire hall was silent, 300 wolves holding still because the sound demanded it. Because a first howl demanded witness, and this was something older and more absolute than a first howl. This was a howl that would not end until the thing it was calling for answered it. "Your Majesty," Lord Petrov began. Constantine looked at his daughter, who was 4 years old and had his eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and a wolf that was making a sound that had no tactical purpose, no strategic value, no place in the ceremony's framework. A sound that was simply and completely true. "Get Giovanna," he said. Chapter 5. The wait was 11 minutes. He knew because he counted. Lumi howled for 11 minutes while a guard went to the east wing where Giovanna had been placed for the duration of the ceremony. And the hall held itself in the particular suspended state of 300 wolves, who had been told by the most fundamental sound their biology recognized that something was wrong and were waiting for it to be made right. He held his daughter. She howled into his chest, her small body rigid with the effort of it, and he felt the sound through his ribs and his spine and the specific place in his chest where father had lived. And he thought, I did this. I made a decision based on framework and tradition and council politics, and my daughter's wolf is telling me, in the only language it has, that the decision was wrong. She had said that's wrong 3 days ago. He had heard her and not listened. The door at the side of the hall opened. Giovanna came through it. She was not dressed for the ceremony. She was in her work clothes, the simple practical things she wore in the nursery wing, and her hair was down because she had not been expecting to be seen by anyone today. She came through the door with the specific quality of someone who had been told something was wrong with the child and had come without stopping to prepare herself for what she was walking into. She saw Lumi in Constantine's arms. She saw the hall. She took in the 300 wolves and the ceremony platform and the formal architecture of the event she had been told she was not qualified to attend. She crossed the hall. She did not hesitate. She did not look at the council or the allied alphas, or Lord Petrov, whose expression was undergoing a series of revisions. She crossed the hall with the focused directness of someone who had identified the thing that needed her, and was not going to be delayed by anything between her and it. She reached them. She held out her arms. Lumi reached for her. The howl stopped, not gradually, completely. One moment the sound was filling the hall, vibrating in the stone, holding 300 wolves in its grip. The next moment there was silence. The specific quality of silence that followed something that had been resolved. Lumi pressed her face into Giovanna's neck and made the other sound, the one from 3 months old, the sound between a whimper and a question that she had made when he picked her up from her crib. The sound of a wolf cub who had found the person they were looking for. Giovanna held her. Her hands were steady. Her posture was the posture of someone doing the thing they were made to do, and she looked at Constantine over his daughter's head, with an expression that was not accusation and not anger and not anything that performed a position. It was simply clear, the expression of a woman who understood what had happened and why and was not going to pretend otherwise. "I'm sorry," he said, quietly. "For her, not the hall. She's all right now," Giovanna said. Which was not forgiveness and not dismissal. It was what mattered. The child was all right. The hall waited. He turned to face it. 300 wolves, the allied packs, the council. Lord Petrov, whose framework had just been interrupted by a 4-year-old and a sound that no framework could accommodate. The ceremony master, who was standing at his position with the expression of someone who needed direction. Constantine looked at the hall. He looked at his daughter, who was quiet in Giovanna's arms, with Petra still clutched in one hand. He looked at Giovanna, whose work clothes were the only unceremonialized thing in the room. And who was? He understood now with the particular clarity of a man whose daughter had just said the thing he had been unable to say. The most important person in it. "Continue the ceremony," he said. He looked at the seat beside his own on the platform. "Bring another chair." Chapter 6. The ceremony continued. This was the thing about ceremonies. They were designed to absorb disruption, to flex without breaking, to contain the unexpected within a structure old enough to have encountered most versions of the unexpected. The ceremony master resumed the invocations. The allied alphas completed their bonds. The pack's collective response, when it came the second time, was whole. Giovanna sat beside Constantine on the platform with Lumi in her lap. She sat in her work clothes with her hair down in front of 300 wolves and did not perform anything she was not. She held the child, and the child was quiet, and the ceremony went on around them. She did not look at Lord Petrov. Constantine did. Once, and what he saw on Petrov's face was not the outrage he had expected. It was something more complicated. The expression of a man whose framework had encountered a load condition it was not designed for, and who was perhaps for the first time in a very long career reconsidering the framework rather than the load. After the ceremony, the hall resolved into the formal reception, the mingling period where alliances were reinforced and positions were adjusted in the informal language of proximity and conversation. Constantine watched Giovanna from across the room. She had not changed clothes. She had not apologized for her appearance. She was sitting near the east window with Lumi, who had fallen asleep in her lap with the comprehensive unconsciousness of a child who had spent her entire emotional reserves and had nothing left for consciousness. The allied alphas approached him one by one, as protocol required, and offered their formal congratulations on the ceremony's completion. Most of them did not mention the interruption. 3 of them did. Alpha Miranova of the Northern Territory said, "Your cub has her mother's lungs." "Her mother died in childbirth," Constantine said. Miranova looked at Giovanna across the room. "I know who I see," she said, and moved on. Alpha Ferreira of the Southern Coastal Pack said, "The first howl only happens once. That was not a first howl. That was something I have not heard before." "What would you call it?" Constantine said. "A correction," Ferreira said. He looked at the platform where the extra chair still sat. "Your cub corrected the ceremony." Lord Petrov found him in the corridor afterward, when the reception was winding down and the hall was beginning to empty. He stood in the specific posture of a man who was about to say something that cost him, and had decided to pay. "The framework," Petrov said, "is a tool." Constantine waited. "Tools serve purposes," Petrov said. "When the tool no longer serves the purpose, the tool is revised." He looked at the corridor wall as if the architecture were easier to address than the man in front of him. The guest list framework for the binding ceremony was designed to ensure the Pack's bonds were reaffirmed in the presence of those who mattered to the Pack's unity. He paused. "Your daughter has identified someone who matters to the Pack's unity. The framework should be revised to reflect that." It was, Constantine thought, the closest thing to an apology Lord Petrov had produced in 3 generations of service. "Thank you, Gregor," he said. Petrov nodded once. Left. Chapter 7. He found Giovanna that evening in the nursery. Lumi was asleep. Fully asleep, the deep restorative sleep of a child who had spent the day doing something enormous and was recovering from it with the thoroughness that only the very young could manage. Petra was tucked under her arm. The nursery was warm and quiet in the way that rooms were warm and quiet when a child was safely sleeping in them. Giovanna was in the chair beside the crib, not reading, not working, simply sitting with the quality of presence that he had been watching for 14 months, the particular attention of a woman who was where she was and was not thinking about being somewhere else. He sat in the other chair. "She's fine," Giovanna said. Before he asked, "She ate. She shifted once, briefly just to settle. She's sleeping well." "I know," he said. "I came for you. I made a decision," he said. 6 weeks ago when Petrov raised the framework. I accepted the framework because accepting it was easier than challenging it, and because challenging it would have required me to explain something I had not yet explained to myself." He paused. "My daughter did not have that difficulty. She is 4 years old, and she understood the situation more clearly than I did." "She understood that she wanted me there," Giovanna said. "That is not the same as understanding the political. It is more than the political situation," he said. "The political situation is the layer I have been operating in because it is the layer I know how to operate in. The layer underneath it is the one my daughter was operating in. She was not making a political statement. She was making a true sound." 14 months, he said. "You have been in this stronghold for 14 months, and in that time you have become the center of my daughter's world. You have done this not by performing anything but by being consistently, reliably yourself." He looked at the crib. "And I have been watching you do it, and I have been..." He stopped, found the word. "Changed by watching it. Not by the watching of your care for Lumi, though that has changed me. By the watching of you." "Constantine," she said. He heard his name the way he had heard Lumi's howl, as something that went directly to the place where it mattered, bypassing every intermediate structure. "I banned you from the ceremony because including you would have required me to explain to the council and to myself that you are not a household staff member to me," he said. "That you have not been a household staff member to me for months. That what I feel when you are in a room is not what I feel when staff members are in a room." He held her eyes. "And I chose the framework over that truth, because the truth was harder. My daughter chose the truth. She was braver than I was." Giovanna looked at the sleeping child. at the silver-white hair that caught the low light, at the small hand holding Petra, at the 4-year-old who had done in 11 minutes what her father had not done in 14 months. I heard the howl, she said, from the east wing. Through the stone, I heard it, and I knew what it was before anyone came to the door. She looked at him. I knew because I felt it. Not heard. Felt. The way you feel a thing that is yours. She is yours, he said. She chose you, 14 months ago. She chose you and she has not unchosen you. And today she told a room of 300 wolves that the decision was not negotiable. And you, Giovanna said. What is your decision? He looked at her in the low light of the nursery, the face he had been memorizing for 14 months without admitting he was memorizing it. The hands that held his daughter with the specific care of someone who understood what they were holding. My decision, he said, is that Lord Petrov is right. The framework is a tool. When the tool no longer serves the purpose, the tool is revised. He paused. I am revising it. What does that mean? She said. Specifically. It means I am asking you to stay, he said. Not in the nursery, not as staff. As, he looked at the crib, then back at her. As the person my daughter chose. As the person I have been choosing, every day, without saying so. In whatever capacity you are willing to occupy. She was quiet for a long time. The nursery held them in its particular warmth. The sleeping child, the wooden wolf, the low light. I am an Omega from the Reshka district, she said. I have no rank, no pack designation. I arrived here through a seasonal intake and I was placed in the nursery by Madame Ivankov because she thought I was good with children. You are good with children, he said. You are also good with territorial politics, which you demonstrated today by walking into a hall of 300 wolves in your work clothes and not adjusting yourself for any of them. You are good with me, which you demonstrate every time you say my name as if it belongs to a person rather than a title. He paused. The Reshka district and the seasonal intake and Madame Ivankov's judgment are the reasons you are here. They are not the reasons you should stay. What are the reasons I should stay? Because my daughter's wolf made a sound today that it should only make once in a life. And it made it for you, he said. Because I have been 2 steps behind my daughter for 14 months, and I am tired of being behind. He held her gaze. Because the framework was wrong and you were right, and I would like very much to stop pretending that the thing I have been feeling for 14 months is something I can manage from a professional distance. You are very bad at professional distance, she said. I am aware. You have been coming to the nursery every evening for 11 months. I have. The territorial reports do not require nightly nursery visits. They do not. Lumi is usually asleep by the time you arrive. I stay anyway. She pressed her lips together. He had been watching her do that for 14 months. The specific gesture that meant something was happening behind the composure that she was deciding whether to show. I stay because you're there, he said. I want that stated plainly. Not because of Lumi. Because of you. Then she said, when she howled today, I felt it through the stone. 3 floors and 2 corridors, and I felt it in my wrist, like a mark that wasn't there, but should have been. She looked at the crib. I have loved her since the first week. She walked into the nursery, and she looked at me, and she decided, and I have been hers since that decision. She looked at him. I have been yours for somewhat less time, but the trajectory has been clear. How much less time? 11 months, she said. When you started coming to the nursery and staying after she fell asleep. That is not somewhat less, he said. That is almost the same amount of time. I am aware, she said. I have been managing it from a professional distance. He looked at her. She looked at him. The nursery was very quiet. We are very bad at professional distance, he said. Terrible, she agreed. He reached for her hand. She gave it. Her fingers were warm the way she was warm. Completely, without reservation, the temperature of someone who held nothing back from the things they had decided to hold. In the crib, Lumi shifted in her sleep and made a sound. Not the howl, not the whimper. Something new. The specific small sound of a child who was dreaming and whose dream was good. Chapter 8. The formal announcement came 3 weeks later. Not because it required 3 weeks of preparation, it required approximately 1 meeting with Lord Petrov, who had already revised the framework and who received the announcement with the settled competence of a man who had seen the load conditions and adjusted the architecture. The 3 weeks were for Giovanna, who had asked for the time to speak with her family in the Rezhka district and to prepare herself for the specific transition between the person she had been and the person she was becoming. "I am not becoming someone else," she had said when he asked what the preparation involved. "I am arranging the same person in a larger context. That takes time." He had found this the most reassuring thing she could have said. The announcement was made in the great hall, the same hall where Lumi had howled. Constantine stood at the platform with Giovanna beside him and Lumi in Giovanna's arms, because Lumi had developed a strong position on the question of whether she would be present for events involving Giovanna, and the position was, yes, always, non-negotiable. He said what needed to be said, that Giovanna Rice of the Rezhka district would be recognized as the Alpha's chosen mate, and would assume the position of Luna in the Vaskov Pact's formal structure. He said it plainly, without elaboration, because elaboration was for situations that required justification, and this situation did not. The Hull's response was complicated. 300 wolves processing a thing that was unprecedented in the Vaskov stronghold's history. An Omega from the seasonal intake, a nursery attendant, a woman with no rank and no lineage and no political value, standing on the ceremonial platform holding the Alpha's daughter as if she had always been there. Some of them struggled with it. She had expected that, and he had expected that, and they had discussed it and agreed that struggle was the appropriate response to change, and that the appropriate response to struggle was patience. Some of them, and this was the part that surprised him, did not struggle at all. Alpha Ferreira, who had called the howl a correction, sent a formal congratulation within the hour. Alpha Miranova of the Northern Territory sent a gift, a carved wooden wolf, silver-white, with a note that said simply, "For the cub who knew." Lumi received the wolf with the gravity of someone being presented with a diplomatic offering, and named it Giovanna, which she said was the best name she knew. Epilogue. The spring brought changes the way spring always did. Gradually, then completely. The stronghold adjusted, not without friction, not without the specific growing pains of an institution accommodating something it had not been designed for, but with the steady accumulation of evidence that the accommodation was worth making. Giovanna did not transform into a political figure, she became one, which was different. The way growing was different from being remade. She brought to the role the same quality she brought to everything, the attention, the consistency, the specific presence of someone who was where they were and was not performing being anywhere else. The nursery remained hers. This was the thing she had been clearest about, that the role of Luna did not replace the role of the person Lumi had chosen, that the political responsibilities would be learned and managed, but the child would not be delegated. Constantine had not argued with this because it was correct, and because arguing with it would have been arguing with the foundational logic of everything that had brought them here. Lumi bloomed. This was Claudine's word, and it was the right one. The child who had spent 2 years without a lasting attachment beyond her father had become a child with a center, a fixed point, the specific gravity of a person who woke every morning and found that the person she needed was already there. The morning part, she called it, the part where you open your eyes and someone is already there. On an evening in late spring, Constantine came to the nursery at the usual hour. Lumi was asleep. Giovanna was in the chair. The room was warm. He sat beside her. "Petrov has revised the ceremony framework," he said. "Formally, the revision will be in effect for the next binding ceremony." "What does it say?" "It says that the guest list is determined by significance to the Pact's unity, as identified by the Alpha and confirmed by the Council." He paused. "It does not mention rank." She looked at the crib. "That is a meaningful revision." Petrov called it a structural improvement, he said. He was very specific that it was not an apology. "It is both," she said. "I know." He looked at Lumi, at the silver-white hair and the carved wolf named Giovanna, tucked under one arm, and the face that was peaceful in the way of children who had everything they needed within reaching distance. "She hasn't howled since," he said. "No," Giovanna said. "They say the first howl only happens once. They say that. What she did in the ceremony hall was not a first howl," he said. Ferreira called it. He thought about the sound. The 11 seconds at 3 months old, and the 11 minutes in the ceremony hall, and the silence after Giovanna had crossed the room and taken the child in her arms. The silence that was not absence but resolution. "I would call it the truest thing anyone in that room has ever said," he told her. "Including me." He put his arm around her. The nursery held them in its specific warmth. the sleeping child and the two people she had brought together by the simple, absolute method of knowing what she needed and refusing to be quiet about it. Outside, the spring was doing what it did in the Vaskov territory, arriving slowly, building gradually, becoming itself at its own pace. Inside, the stronghold was doing the same, adjusting, settling, finding the shape that came after the old shape had been broken by something small and fierce and true. He thought about frameworks, about the ones that held and the ones that didn't, and the specific sound of a 4-year-old telling a room full of wolves that the framework was wrong. She had been right. The best corrections usually came from the smallest voices, the ones that had not yet learned to be quiet about the things that mattered.